Victor Russo hadn't shared a bed in 5 years. Omegas were a liability. They asked questions. Expected affection, or worse. Tried to find a pulse beneath his tailored suits. They scented the air with desperation, leaving trails of cloying sweetness that made his jaw tighten and his temper fray. He preferred the quiet. The solitary cold of his empty sheets. The absence of another heartbeat disturbing the rhythm of his breathing. That was the rule. Unbreakable. Until a Tuesday night in December. He opened his bedroom door, shrugging off a leather holster, only to find a tangle of gray cotton and spilled brown hair on his mattress. His new maid was fast asleep. Curled into a tight ball, knees drawn to his chest, face half buried in Victor's pillow. Victor froze in the doorway. The room smelled wrong. Different. Underneath the cedar and cold rain of his own scent, there was something else. Something faint and warm. Like fresh bread and rain on dry earth. It was subtle, barely there, but it hit Victor like a physical blow to the chest. He hadn't smelled an Omega's scent in years. Not up close. Not in his private space. He walked closer, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. The man on his bed was young, early 20s, maybe. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath his brown eyes. His face was flushed, his breathing shallow and rapid. A fever. Victor stood at the edge of the mattress, looking down at the intruder. He recognized him vaguely. The new hire. Quiet. Kept his head down. Never made eye contact. What was his name? Bennett. Something Bennett. The boy let out a soft sound, a whimper really, and curled tighter into Victor's pillow. His fingers clutched the charcoal fabric like it was the only solid thing in a spinning world. Victor should wake him. Should call security. Should have him dragged out and fired for trespassing in the East Wing. He didn't move. He stood there for a long moment, watching the steady rise and fall of the boy's chest. The fever flush on his cheekbones. The way his lips parted slightly, cracked and dry. Victor reached out. Slowly. His fingers brushed the boy's forehead. Burning. He pulled his hand back like he'd been burned himself. The boy's scent spiked suddenly, that warm, earthy smell intensifying for just a second before settling back down. Victor's nostrils flared. His instinct stirred, a low thrum of something he deliberately suppressed for half a decade. No. He walked around to the opposite side of the massive bed. He didn't take off his clothes. He just sat on the edge, toed off his leather shoes, and lay down on his back on the far side of the mattress. Leaving 3 feet of empty space between them. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft, rhythmic sound of the boys breathing over the howl of the winter storm outside. For the first time in 5 years, Victor Russo closed his eyes and actually slept. Across the city, Dante Moretti was staring at a hospital bill that made his stomach turn over. $52,000. The numbers at the bottom were printed in bold black ink, but to Dante they looked like a death sentence. His little sister, Isabella, 14 years old, bright eyes, a laugh that could fill a room, was dying. The doctors had found the tumor 3 months ago. They'd been optimistic at first. Now the optimism had curdled into careful, measured words and meaningful glances exchanged over clipboards. Dante folded the bill, his knuckles white, and shoved it into his coat pocket. He looked at his reflection in the cracked mirror of their cramped apartment. Dark circles under his eyes. Skin pale. He was 23, but he felt 100. He didn't have time to be tired. An hour later, Dante was standing in the massive marble-floored foyer of the Russo estate, wearing a stiff gray uniform that smelled vaguely of industrial bleach. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, was a stern woman with a face like a carved wooden mask. She paced in front of the line of 5 maids. Dante was the only male among them, but he'd learned long ago not to let that bother him. Work was work. You do not speak unless spoken to, Mrs. Gable barked, her heels clicking sharply on the stone. You do not make eye contact with Mr. Russo or his associates. You do not ask questions about what you see, what you hear, or what you clean up. Discretion is why you are paid triple the market rate. Break that rule, and you won't just lose your job. She let the threat hang in the cold air. Dante stared straight ahead. He didn't care if Victor Russo was running a cartel, a cult, or a political campaign. He just needed the paycheck. Bennett, Mrs. Gable snapped. Yes, ma'am. East Wing today. Dusting, vacuuming, changing linens. Move. The East Wing was Victor's private sanctuary. The other maids shot Dante looks of mingled pity and relief. The boss was notoriously particular. A stray hair on the sink, a smudge on the glass, it meant instant firing. But Dante just nodded, grabbed his caddy of supplies, and started working. He spent the next 6 hours in silent, grueling labor. The estate was a cavern of dark wood, leather, and steel. It felt more like a high-end bunker than a home. Dante moved through it like a ghost, methodically erasing any trace of human presence. When he finally reached the master suite, the sheer scale of it made him pause. The bed alone was massive, a California king draped in heavy charcoal linens. The room smelled of cedar, cold rain, and something else underneath. Something sharp and electric. Like ozone before a storm. Alpha. Dante's instincts flickered. His hindbrain recognized the scent even if his conscious mind wanted to ignore it. He pushed through the feeling, focusing on the work. He stripped the bed, hauling the heavy mattress up to tuck the fresh sheets tightly beneath the corners. His back ached. A dull throb started behind his temples. He ignored it. He finished the room, leaving it spotless, sterile, and cold. Just a ghost moving through a dead house. He didn't know Victor Russo. He didn't want to. To him, the Alpha was just the signature on a very large, very necessary check. By mid-December, the Chicago winter turned brutal. A bitter freeze settled over the city, encasing the Russo estate in a thick shell of ice. It was a Tuesday. Objectively the worst Tuesday of Dante's life. He had woken up shivering in his freezing apartment, his throat feeling like it was lined with broken glass. A fever had set in, heavy and disorienting, wrapping his brain in a thick fog. But he couldn't call in sick. Mrs. Gable didn't accept sick days, and Isabella's medication was due for a refill on Friday. He swallowed 3 ibuprofen, wrapped himself in a scarf, and made the trek to the estate. The moment he stepped through the service doors, the heat of the mansion hit him like a physical blow, making him sway on his feet. Bennett, East Wing again, Mrs. Gable ordered, barely glancing at him. Mr. Russo is out dealing with business. He expects the suite deep cleaned upon his return. Dante nodded blindly. He gathered his supplies and dragged himself up the grand staircase. His joints screamed with every step. His vision blurred at the edges. Meanwhile, across the city, Victor was dealing with a leak. The docks were freezing, the wind coming off Lake Michigan like a knife. Victor stood in the shadows of a shipping container, watching his men drag a bruised and bleeding warehouse manager to his knees. The man had been skimming from the shipments. Selling Russo weapons to a rival crew. Victor, please, the man begged, blood dripping from his split lip onto the frozen concrete. I have a family. I have kids. Victor stared down at him. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel pity. He just felt a bone-deep, exhausting weariness. The same excuses. The same betrayals. The endless cyclical violence of his life. You should have thought of them before you stole from me, Victor said quietly. He didn't pull the trigger. He just nodded to his lieutenant, turned, and walked back to his armored SUV. The muffled crack of a gunshot echoed behind him, swallowed instantly by the howling wind. Victor climbed into the back seat, leaning his head against the tinted glass. He closed his eyes. The headache he'd been fighting for 3 days was blinding. He just wanted a shower. He wanted a drink. He wanted the heavy, silent isolation of his bedroom. Back at the estate, Dante was losing the battle against his body. He was in the master suite, trying to change the duvet cover. It felt like wrestling a parachute. The fever was spiking. His skin was alternating between burning hot and freezing cold. He managed to get the cover on, smoothing it out over the mattress. But as he reached across the center of the bed, his knees gave out. He collapsed onto the mattress. Just a minute, he told himself, staring at the gray ceiling. Just give me 1 minute to catch my breath. The bed was impossibly soft. It smelled like cedar and safety. And underneath that, the sharp, electric alpha scent. It should have made him uneasy. Instead, it was oddly grounding. The exhaustion of working 2 jobs. The terror of losing his sister. The physical toll of the virus. It all crashed down on him at once. He curled onto his side, pulling his knees to his chest. He closed his eyes, intending to rest for exactly 60 seconds. The darkness pulled him under instantly. 4 hours later, the heavy oak door of the master suite clicked open. Victor stepped inside. He'd shed his suit jacket in the foyer. He pulled at his tie, loosening it from his throat, and reached under his arm to unclip his shoulder holster. He was operating on pure muscle memory. Enter the room. Lock the door. Disarm. Sleep. He turned toward the bed. He froze. His hand dropped instantly to the heavy grip of his backup weapon at his waist. His eyes adjusted to the dim lighting. There was a lump beneath the charcoal duvet. Someone was in his bed. Victor moved silently, a predator slipping across the carpet. He drew the gun, clicking the safety off. He approached the side of the bed, his jaw tight, expecting an assassin, a setup, a nightmare. He reached out and yanked the heavy duvet back. Dante let out a soft, shivering sigh, curling tighter into a ball. He was wearing his gray maid's uniform, his shoes kicked off near the nightstand. His hair had escaped its bun, spilling across Victor's pillows. His face was flushed red with fever, his brow furrowed in troubled sleep. And his scent, that warm, earthy smell, was stronger now. Thicker. It wrapped around Victor's senses before he could stop it. Victor stood there, the gun aimed at the floor, perfectly still. He didn't yell. He didn't call his security team. He just stared. He recognized him vaguely. The quiet one who never looked up. Bennett. Victor watched the steady, shallow rise and fall of the boy's chest. He looked fragile. Completely, utterly defeated. A rational man would have woken him up. A ruthless boss would have dragged him out by his hair and thrown him into the snow for trespassing. But Victor was too tired for violence. And the utter stillness of the room had shifted. It didn't feel like a vault anymore. It felt occupied. He slowly engaged the safety of his gun and set it on the nightstand. He looked at the door. He looked back at the boy. He walked around to the opposite side of the massive bed. He didn't take off his clothes. He just sat on the edge, toed off his leather shoes, and lay down on his back on the far side of the mattress, leaving 3 feet of empty space between them. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft, rhythmic sound of the boys breathing over the howl of the winter storm outside. For the first time in 5 years, Victor Russo closed his eyes and actually slept. Dante woke up slowly, floating up from the heavy depths of a fever dream. His body felt incredibly warm. For a second, he thought he was back in his childhood bed, safe and oblivious. But then his senses began to boot up. The mattress beneath him was too firm. The sheets were heavy cotton. And the smell, wood smoke, cedar, and something else. Something sharp and electric. Alpha. His eyes snapped open. He was staring at a dark gray wall. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded his veins. He remembered the fever, the duvet, lying down for just 1 second. Oh God! Oh my God! He scrambled backward, tangling his legs in the thick blanket, trying to get out of the bed. His heel hit something solid. Something warm. Dante froze. The blood drained from his face. He turned his head, inch by agonizing inch. Lying next to him, propped up on one elbow, was Victor Russo. He was fully dressed in a wrinkled button-down shirt, his dark hair messy. He wasn't asleep. He was wide awake, watching Dante with a calm, unreadable expression. His eyes, sharp and gray, tracked Dante's panic. Dante stopped breathing. He was dead. He was actually going to die here. Shot in the head for sleeping in the Mafia boss's bed. I'm sorry, he stammered, his voice a raspy whisper. He scrambled over the side of the bed, his stocking feet hitting the floor. He stumbled, his knees weak, and caught himself on the edge of the nightstand. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, I was sick, I was so dizzy, I just sat down. I swear to God, Mr. Russo. I'll leave right now. You don't have to pay me for this week. I'll pack my things. He was hyperventilating, backing toward the door. Stop moving. Victor's voice wasn't loud, but it hit Dante like a physical wall. Dante froze in his tracks. Victor sat up slowly, rolling his shoulders. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely indifferent, which somehow made it worse. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and looked down at Dante's small, trembling frame. You have a fever, he stated. It wasn't a question. Yes. But I'm fine. I'm leaving. You were shaking half the night, Victor continued, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. You kept pulling the duvet. You drooled, by the way. Dante's face flushed a violent crimson. What? You drool. Victor stood up. He was a massive man, easily over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and imposing. The sheer presence of him in the room sucked all the oxygen out of the air. He walked over to a small wet bar in the corner, poured some water from a pitcher, and walked back, holding the glass out to Dante. Dante just stared at it. Was it poisoned? Was this a trick? Take the water, Bennett. I'm not going to shoot you for taking a nap. His hand trembled as he reached out and took the cold glass. His fingers brushed Victor's, and he flinched. But Victor's skin was warm. His grip steady. Dante drank the water entirely, because his throat felt like sandpaper, half expecting to drop dead on the carpet. Why didn't you wake me up? He asked softly, the question slipping out before his common sense could stop it. Why didn't you have me thrown out? Victor looked at him. Really looked at him. He saw the dark bags under Dante's eyes, the worn, frayed edges of his cheap uniform, the desperate, caged animal look in his brown eyes. He wasn't an assassin. He wasn't a spy. He was just a broken thing trying to survive. Victor recognized the look. He saw it in the mirror every morning. I was tired, Victor said simply. You were quiet. It seemed like too much effort. It was a lie. He had half a dozen men downstairs who would have removed Dante in 30 seconds. But Victor didn't want to examine why he had let him stay. Why the sound of his breathing had anchored him in a way a sleeping pill never could. "Get your shoes," he ordered, turning his back on Dante to open his closet. "Go down to the kitchen. Tell Mrs. Gable to give you the day off." "Paid." Dante gaped at his back. "She'll fire me." "She won't," Victor said, his voice dropping back into that icy, authoritative timbre. "Because you're going to tell her that from now on, you are the only person permitted to clean this suite. No one else comes in here. Just you." Dante scrambled into his shoes, his mind reeling. He survived. He kept his job. But as he hurried out the heavy oak door, glancing back one last time at the ruthless Mafia boss standing in the center of the room, he realized a terrifying truth. He hadn't just kept his job. He had just become something Victor Russo noticed. And in his world, that was infinitely more dangerous than being fired. Downstairs, the kitchen was a hive of morning activity. Mrs. Gable looked up from her clipboard as Dante walked in, looking pale and disheveled. "Where have you been, Bennett? You missed roll call." Dante swallowed hard. "Mr. Russo had me cleaning his suite." Mrs. Gable frowned, her eyes narrowing. "All night?" "Yes." Dante lied, keeping his eyes glued to the floor. "He said I'm the only one allowed in the East Wing from now on." The kitchen went dead silent. The other maids stopped chopping, scrubbing, and talking. They all stared at Dante. Being requested by the boss wasn't a promotion. It was a target on your back. Upstairs, Victor stood by the window, watching the morning snow fall over the estate. He touched the side of the bed where Dante had slept. It was still slightly warm. He didn't know the boy's story. But for the first time in half a decade, Victor Russo found himself curious. And a curious monster is a very dangerous thing to be around. The isolation was immediate and absolute. Within 24 hours of Victor's order, Dante became a pariah among the estate staff. Mrs. Gable didn't speak to him unless strictly necessary, and when she did, her words were clipped and laced with cold, simmering suspicion. The other maids stopped talking when Dante entered the break room. They gave him a wide berth in the hallways, their eyes darting to his face, searching for a bruised lip, a new watch, or the smug entitlement of a boss's new plaything. They saw none of those things. Dante just kept his head down, pushed his cart, and walked up the grand staircase to the East Wing. The master suite had become his entire world. He learned the geography of Victor Russo's life through the things he left behind. Most days, the room was immaculate. But slowly, the sterile perfection began to crack. One Tuesday, he found a heavy crystal tumbler on the nightstand, half full of amber liquid smelling sharply of peat and smoke. He washed it and put it away. On Thursday, he found a custom-tailored charcoal suit jacket thrown carelessly over an armchair. The left cuff was stained with a dark, rusty brown. Blood! Dante stood holding the jacket for a long time, his heart doing a slow, heavy thump against his ribs. He didn't call Mrs. Gable. He didn't run. He walked into the massive ensuite bathroom, retrieved a bottle of hydrogen peroxide from his cleaning caddy, and spent 20 minutes methodically dabbing the stain until the fabric was spotless. He hung the jacket back in the closet. He asked no questions. He left no notes. He just erased the violence. Victor noticed. He noticed the missing stain on his jacket. He noticed the way the heavy curtains were always drawn exactly to the edge of the window frame, blocking the glare of the morning sun from hitting his pillows. He noticed the absolute absence of any lingering scent, no cheap cologne, no artificial freshener trying to mask an Omega's natural smell. Dante's scent was there, just barely. A ghost in the room. Warm earth and fresh-baked bread. It was subtle enough that Victor could pretend he didn't notice it. But he did. Every time he walked into the suite, his nostrils flared involuntarily, searching for it. Victor hated that. He decided to test the boundary. He left a loaded Glock 19 on the center of his dark oak desk, right beside a ledger detailing routing numbers for offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. A deliberate, dangerous trap. Information that rival syndicates would pay millions to acquire. A weapon that could put him away for a decade. He returned that night at 2 in the morning. He unlocked the door and stepped into the quiet chill of the suite. The room smelled faintly of lemon and clean cotton. And underneath that warm, earthy undertone. He walked over to the desk. The surface had been polished to a mirror shine. The ledger was exactly where he'd left it, perfectly aligned with the edge of the wood. The gun had been carefully placed on top of a folded dark gray microfiber cloth, presumably so the heavy metal wouldn't scratch the polish. Victor stared at the microfiber cloth. A short, rough sound escaped his throat. It took him a moment to realize it was a laugh. The sound felt foreign, jarring in the empty room. He didn't know if Dante was incredibly smart, incredibly stupid, or just entirely broken. But as he stripped off his tie and lay back on the mattress, the same mattress where the Omega had slept, perfectly curled on the opposite side just a week prior, Victor realized he was waiting for morning. He was waiting to see what Dante would do next. But the real world doesn't respect the quiet boundaries of a locked room. The intrusion came on a Friday. Dante was vacuuming the thick rug beneath Victor's bed when his cell phone vibrated in his apron pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again, a frantic, continuous rattling. He shut off the vacuum. The silence of the room crashed in on him. He pulled the cheap, cracked phone from his pocket and looked at the screen. St. Jude's Memorial. His stomach plummeted into his shoes. He swiped the screen, his thumb trembling. Hello? Dante Bennett. It was Dr. Hayes. He sounded tired. It's Isabella. The room tilted. Dante grabbed the edge of the heavy mattress to steady himself. What happened? Did the treatment fail? Her blood pressure bottomed out during chemo. We managed to stabilize her, but the strain on her heart is severe. Dante, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The tumor has grown. The standard treatments aren't working fast enough anymore. She needs a new course of therapy, and she needs to stay in the ICU. Do it, Dante breathed, his voice cracking. Please, just do it. I can't. Not without authorization from administration. Your insurance lapsed 3 days ago. The grace period is over. The hospital won't admit her to the ICU or begin the new protocol without a deposit. They consider it out-of-network catastrophic care. How much? He already knew the answer would ruin him, but he had to hear the number. $60,000. Dante, by tonight. Or I have to discharge her to a palliative care facility. Palliative care. A place to die comfortably. I'll get it, Dante said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. Give me until tonight. Please, Dr. Hayes. Keep her in the bed. I will get the money. He hung up the phone. He didn't cry. There was no time to cry, and tears had never paid a single bill in his life. He looked around the cavernous, immaculate bedroom of Victor Russo. There was more money in the custom wool rugs and Italian leather chairs than he would make in a lifetime. He had no credit. He had no family. He had no options except one. Victor arrived at the estate just past midnight. The drive from the docks had been tense. Leo Donati was pushing back. The missing shipments were a smokescreen. Donati was trying to rally the northern families to force Victor into a marriage alliance with his daughter, hoping to dilute Victor's iron grip on the supply lines. Victor had spent 4 hours subtly threatening men twice his age. He was exhausted. His temper frayed to a thin, jagged wire. He wanted silence. He wanted his room. He bypassed his men in the foyer, walked up the stairs, and pushed open the heavy door to his suite. He reached for the light switch. "Don't shoot." Victor's hand halted a fraction of an inch from the brass plate. His other hand was already inside his jacket, his fingers curled around the grip of his gun. He stood perfectly still, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. Dante was sitting in the armchair in the corner of the room. He was wearing his gray uniform, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles glowed white in the moonlight spilling through the window. Victor slowly withdrew his hand from his jacket. He flipped the light switch. The sudden glare made Dante wince. "You're in my chair, Bennett," Victor said. His voice was flat, devoid of surprise, but there was a dangerous, quiet edge to it. "I know. I'm sorry." Dante didn't stand up. His legs were shaking too badly. Victor walked to the wet bar. He poured 2 fingers of scotch, keeping his eyes on Dante's reflection in the mirror behind the bottles. The Omega looked worse than the day he'd slept in Victor's bed. His skin was a sickly, translucent gray. The dark circles under his eyes looked like bruises. "You have 2 minutes to explain why you are sitting in the dark in my bedroom," Victor said, turning around to face Dante. He took a slow sip of the scotch. "Before I call my men to drag you out. I need money." The words tumbled out of Dante's mouth, blunt and desperate. Victor stared at him. A heavy, suffocating silence descended on the room. He didn't laugh. He just looked at Dante with a profound, terrifying emptiness. "You broke into a Mafia boss's private quarters," Victor said softly, pacing slowly toward Dante. "To ask for a loan." "Not a loan." Dante's voice shook, but his chin lifted slightly. "An advance. Or a trade. Or whatever you want to call it. I need $60,000. Victor stopped a few feet from the chair. He looked down at Dante. "Do you have a gambling problem, Bennett? Drugs? A boyfriend who owes the wrong people?" "My sister." The crack in Dante's voice betrayed the steel he was trying to project. "She's 14. She has cancer. The insurance cut off, and if I don't pay the hospital $60,000 by tomorrow morning, they are going to move her to hospice to die." Victor analyzed his face. He was an expert at reading lies. He searched for the micro-expressions of deception, the twitch of an eye, the forced swallow, the defensive posture. He found nothing. Just raw, bleeding terror. He turned away from Dante, walking to his desk. He set his glass down on a coaster. "I am not a bank," Victor said to the wall. "I am not a charity. I am the man who controls the underground economy of this city. People who owe me money usually end up at the bottom of the lake. Why would you come to me? Because you didn't wake me up." Victor stiffened. "When I was sick." Dante's voice trembled. "You could have thrown me out. You could have fired me. You didn't. You gave me a glass of water. It's the only kind thing anyone has done for me in 5 years. I don't have anyone else to ask." Victor turned around. He leaned against the heavy oak desk, crossing his arms. He looked at this tiny, fragile Omega in his cheap uniform. He was nothing. A speck of dust in Victor's violent world. He should write a check, fire him, and be done with it. But Victor Russo didn't let go of things that intrigued him. $60,000 is a significant debt, Victor said quietly. "If I pay this, you don't work for Mrs. Gable anymore. You work for me. Directly. And not just cleaning. Dante's breath hitched. His mind raced to the darkest corners of what that meant. I won't, I don't want your body. Victor snapped, a flash of irritation breaking his cold veneer. I have no interest in buying an Omega. What I want is your time. Your absolute loyalty. You will move into the staff quarters permanently. You will not leave this estate without my permission. You will be on call 24 hours a day for whatever I need done in this house. You will disappear from the outside world. He was offering Dante a cage. A gilded, secure cage. How long? Dante asked. Until the debt is paid, Victor replied. At your current salary, minus living expenses, we'll call it 5 years. 5 years of his life signed away to a monster in a tailored suit. But in his mind, Dante saw Isabella's pale face. He heard the steady beep of the heart monitor. Do we have a deal? Victor asked, his gray eyes boring into Dante's. Dante stood up. His legs finally held him. Write the check. Victor pulled a heavy checkbook from his desk drawer. He wrote the numbers with sharp, aggressive strokes of his pen. He tore the check free and held it out. Dante walked across the room. He reached for the paper. As his fingers clamped onto it, Victor didn't let go immediately. He held the tension, forcing Dante to look up at him. You belong to me now, Bennett, he said softly, the weight of the reality settling over them both. Do not ever lie to me. Do not ever betray me. Because the next time you wake up in my bed, I won't be handing you a glass of water. He let go of the check. Dante clutched it to his chest, nodded once, and backed out of the room, fleeing into the dark hallway. Victor watched the door close. He picked up his scotch, downed it in one swallow, and welcomed the burn. 2 weeks passed. Isabella received the treatment. She stabilized. Dante was allowed a 1-hour phone call with her every Sunday evening, monitored by one of Victor's security men standing outside the door of his new room in the staff wing. He had traded his freedom for his sister's life. He didn't regret it for a second. His duties expanded. He was no longer just the maid for the East Wing. He managed Victor's personal schedule within the house, organized his meals with the private chef, and ensured his suits were pressed and ready. He became a silent, efficient shadow, anticipating Victor's needs before he even articulated them. He learned that Victor drank his coffee black, that he read historical biographies at 3 in the morning when he couldn't sleep, and that he hated the smell of lavender. They barely spoke. They communicated through a dance of avoidance and quiet efficiency. Until the first week of February. A blizzard had buried the estate under 3 feet of snow. The security perimeter was blinded by the whiteout. Dante was in the kitchen at 1 in the morning, boiling water for tea, enjoying the rare silence of the sleeping house. The heavy back door leading to the garage slammed open. A blast of freezing air and snow tore through the kitchen, scattering loose papers and knocking a plastic cup off the counter. Dante dropped his mug. It shattered on the tile. Victor stood in the doorway. He was alone. He was heavily leaning against the door frame, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. His black overcoat was soaked, but not entirely from the snow. A dark, heavy liquid was dripping from his left sleeve, pooling onto the pristine white marble of the kitchen floor. Dante froze. The air in his lungs vanished. Victor took a step forward, staggered, and collapsed against the kitchen island. He gripped the granite countertop, his knuckles white, his head hanging down. Mr. Russo. Dante gasped, rushing forward. Don't call Dr. Evans. Victor gritted out through clenched teeth. His face was the color of ash, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing cold radiating off his clothes. Evans is on Donati's payroll. You need a hospital. You're bleeding. Dante reached for Victor's arm, but he violently flinched away. No hospitals, Victor snarled, lifting his head. His eyes were wild, dilated with pain and adrenaline. No one leaves. No one comes in. The leak is inside my crew. He tried to push himself off the counter to walk toward the stairs, but his legs gave out. He slid heavily to the floor, leaving a smear of red down the white cabinets. Dante stood over him, panic warring with adrenaline. He had spent years in and out of hospitals with Isabella. He'd watched doctors insert central lines, clean necrotic tissue, and stop hemorrhages. He wasn't a doctor, but he understood trauma better than most. He knelt beside Victor on the floor. Take your coat off. His voice was surprisingly steady. Victor looked at him, his eyes struggling to focus. What? Take the coat off, Victor. If you pass out before I can get to the wound, you'll bleed to death on this floor. He used Victor's first name without thinking. It felt like breaking glass. Victor didn't argue. He gritted his teeth and let Dante help him peel the heavy, sodden wool coat off his shoulders. The smell of copper hit the air, thick and metallic. Beneath the coat, Victor's white dress shirt was ruined, a deep, jagged slash ran across his left bicep, slicing cleanly through the fabric and deep into the muscle. It wasn't a bullet wound. It was a knife. A close-quarters fight. I need towels, boiling water, and the first aid kit from your bathroom, Dante said, talking to himself as much as to Victor. Third drawer, left side, Victor mumbled, his head thumping back against the lower cabinets. Dante ran. He sprinted up the stairs, ignoring the burning in his lungs, grabbed the massive medical kit Victor kept in his master bath, and raced back down. When he returned, Victor's eyes were closed. His breathing was dangerously shallow. Hey! Dante snapped, dropping to his knees and slapping Victor's cheek lightly. Look at me. Keep your eyes open. Victor's eyes fluttered open. The slate gray was clouded with pain. Dante ripped the sleeve of Victor's shirt open, exposing the wound. It was ugly, deep and jagged, but it hadn't hit the main artery, or Victor would already be dead. He poured iodine directly onto the laceration. Victor let out a guttural roar, his body arching off the floor. His right hand snapped out, wrapping around Dante's throat in a blindingly fast, instinctive reaction of self-defense. His grip was like a vice, cutting off Dante's air instantly. Dante didn't scream. He didn't fight. He placed his small, warm hands over Victor's massive, blood-stained fist holding his throat. He looked directly into Victor's eyes, refusing to break contact. It's just me, he whispered hoarsely, his voice barely squeezing through his restricted windpipe. It's just me. Let go. Victor stared at him. The violence slowly drained from his eyes, replaced by dawning horror at what he was doing. His hand jerked away from Dante's throat as if his skin burned him. I'm sorry, Victor rasped, his chest heaving. I'm sorry. I know. Dante said quietly, rubbing his neck. He picked up a heavy gauze pad and pressed it violently against the wound. Hold this. Don't let up the pressure. Victor clamped his right hand over the gauze. He watched Dante as he moved. His hands were completely steady. He wasn't crying. He wasn't panicking. He was terrifyingly calm. Bathed in Victor's blood on a kitchen floor at 2 a.m. You need stitches, Dante said, threading a curved surgical needle with rapid precision. I've watched the nurses do this on Isabella's port lines. It's going to hurt. A lot. Do it, Victor said. Dante leaned in close. He could feel the warmth of Victor's breath against his cold skin. He could smell the faint scent of lemon soap on his own hands, mixed with the harsh chemical burn of iodine and blood. But underneath all of that, Victor's scent was overwhelming. Sharp ozone and rain. It spiked with the pain, flooding Dante's senses. Every time he pushed the needle through Victor's skin, Victor's muscles jumped, but he didn't make a sound. He just watched Dante's face. The intense concentration furrowing his brow. The slight purse of his lips. For a man who had spent his entire life avoiding trust, placing his survival entirely in the hands of an Omega he'd bought 2 weeks ago felt entirely unnatural. Yet as Dante tied off the final stitch and sat back on his heels, swiping a streak of Victor's blood off his own forehead, Victor realized something undeniable. He didn't want anyone else in the room. He didn't want his guards. He didn't want a doctor. He only wanted Dante. The kitchen was spotless by dawn. Dante had spent 2 hours on his hands and knees with bleach, a wire brush, and a bucket of scalding water, scrubbing until the white marble gave up its secrets. When the morning staff arrived, they found nothing but the faint sterile smell of chemicals. Victor was already in his office. He sat behind his massive desk, dressed in a fresh charcoal suit. He looked perfectly composed. No one looking at him would know a jagged, 6-inch ravine was currently stitched into his left arm, throbbing with a dull, sickening heat. The heavy mahogany doors clicked open. Dante stepped inside, carrying a silver tray with a single cup of black coffee. He didn't announce himself. He walked to the desk, set the tray down, and then, without a word, reached out and locked the office doors from the inside. Victor watched him, his gray eyes tracking every movement. "Take the jacket off." Dante's tone wasn't a request. "I have a meeting with the capos in 20 minutes, Victor replied, though he didn't move to stop Dante as he walked around the desk. "Then you have 19 minutes to let me check for an infection." Victor sighed, a short, clipped sound, and shrugged off the jacket. He unbuttoned the cuffs of his shirt and let Dante pull the left sleeve up over his shoulder. The bruising had already set in, blooming into a violent mosaic of purple and black across his bicep. Dante carefully peeled back the heavy gauze. The stitches held tight. No red streaks. No excessive heat. "It's clean," he murmured. He reached into his apron, pulled out a fresh tube of antibiotic ointment, and applied it with infuriating gentleness. Victor looked down at the top of Dante's head. He could see the exhaustion in the slump of his shoulders. The Omega was surviving on caffeine and sheer stubborn willpower. "You didn't sleep," Victor stated. "Neither did you." Dante taped down a fresh square of gauze. "I don't like blood. I didn't want to close my eyes and see it on the floor again. In my line of work, you get used to it." Dante paused, his hands resting on Victor's arm for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "I don't want to get used to it. If you get used to seeing blood, it means you've stopped caring whose it is." He pulled Victor's sleeve back down and turned to grab the dirty bandages. "Wait." Victor opened the top drawer of his desk. The heavy slide of the metal drawer echoed in the quiet room. He reached inside and pulled out a compact black piece of metal, a Smith & Wesson MP shield. He placed it flat on the leather blotter between them. Dante stared at it like it was a live rattlesnake. "The leak last night wasn't just a low-level errand boy," Victor said, his voice dropping in volume, forcing Dante to lean in to hear him. "Donati bought someone close to me. Someone on my personal detail. I don't know who it is yet. Which means I don't trust anyone in this house." He pushed the gun across the desk until it bumped against the silver coffee tray. "Except you." Dante took a step back, shaking his head. "I don't know how to use that. I've never even held one. It has a safety on the trigger, not a switch. You point it. You pull it. The recoil will snap your wrists back if you don't lock your elbows, but at close range, it won't matter." Victor stood up. He walked around the desk, picked up the weapon, and held it out to Dante by the barrel. "Take it, Bennett." "I'm a maid," Dante whispered, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "You're the only person who knows I'm bleeding. That makes you a liability to my enemies and an asset to me." He stepped closer. The scent of ozone and rain wrapped around Dante. "I can't protect you if I'm looking over my shoulder at my own men. Put it in your apron." Dante looked into his eyes. There was no warmth there, but there was a terrifying, absolute sincerity. He reached out with a trembling hand and took the gun. It was heavier than it looked. Dense. Cold. He slipped it into the deep front pocket of his apron. It weighted him down, a physical anchor pulling him deeper into Victor's dark, suffocating world. "Good," Victor said quietly. "Now go change my bed linens." The shift in their dynamic was subtle but unbreakable. They were no longer boss and employee. They were co-conspirators in a house full of traitors. Over the next 3 days, the tension in the estate thickened until it was hard to breathe. The capos came and went, their faces grim. Shouting matches echoed from behind the closed doors of the dining room. Leo Donati was making his play for the Northern Territories, using Victor's missing weapons as proof of incompetence. Dante stayed out of the way. But he kept the gun in his pocket. On Thursday night, the blizzard returned. The wind battered the massive glass windows of the estate, howling like a dying animal. Dante was in his room in the staff wing, sitting on his narrow twin bed, staring at a photograph of Isabella on his cracked phone. She looked better. The color was returning to her cheeks. The debt was worth it. He told himself that every hour. At 11:42 p.m., the power went out. The estate plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. Dante froze. He waited for the low hum of the massive backup generators to kick in. 5 seconds passed. 10. 20. Nothing. The house remained dead. The silence was shattered by a sound he had never heard before but instantly recognized from movies, a sharp, mechanical thwack, like a heavy staple gun driving into wood. It came from the west corridor. Then came the screaming. Panic clawed at Dante's throat. He stood up in the pitch black, his hands frantically patting the dark to find the apron he'd draped over his chair. He grabbed the heavy fabric, digging his hand into the pocket until his fingers curled around the cold grip of the Smith Wesson. The door to his room suddenly splintered inward with a deafening crash. Dante screamed, dropping to his knees and leveling the gun at the doorway with shaking, untrained hands. A flashlight beam cut through the dark, hitting him directly in the eyes, blinding him. "Put it down. It's me." The beam shifted toward the floor. Victor stood in the shattered doorway. He was wearing black cargo pants and a dark long-sleeve shirt, holding a customized rifle in his right hand. His face was a mask of cold, calculated murder. "Donati," Dante gasped, scrambling to his feet. "He bought the night shift captain." Victor's voice was flat. He stepped into the room, grabbing Dante by the bicep and pulling him into the hallway. They cut the hard lines and spiked the generators. "We have maybe 4 minutes before they clear the ground floor and move up. Where are your men?" "Dead. Or getting there." Victor pushed Dante gently down the hallway. "Stay behind me. Step where I step. Don't make a sound." They moved through the sprawling, dark corridors of the staff wing. The estate felt entirely alien in the blackness, the air smelling like cordite and drywall dust. Downstairs, the sharp, suppressed cracks of gunfire continued, followed by the heavy thuds of bodies hitting the hardwood. "We need to get to the master suite," Victor whispered, pausing at the top of the grand staircase. "The walls are reinforced with half-inch steel plate. The door is biometric and mechanical. If we get inside, they can't breach it without C4, and Donati's men aren't carrying explosives. They want the house intact. Dante nodded, gripping his small gun so tightly his hand cramped. They moved out onto the mezzanine. Below them, the massive foyer was illuminated by the sweeping beams of 3 flashlights attached to the barrels of tactical rifles. Men in dark tactical gear were moving systematically from room to room. Victor raised his rifle, resting the barrel on the marble balustrade. "Run for the suite," he whispered, not looking at Dante. "I'll cover you." "I'm not leaving you," Dante hissed. "Dante, move!" Victor barked, shedding the quiet facade. One of the flashlights downstairs snapped upward, the beam catching them on the mezzanine. "Top floor, east wing," a voice yelled. Victor squeezed his trigger. The rifle roared, a deafening explosion of sound and muzzle flash that temporarily blinded Dante. The man with the flashlight collapsed backward into the foyer, his chest cratered. The return fire was instantaneous. Bullets chewed into the marble balustrade, sending razor-sharp shards of stone flying into the air. Dante hit the deck, covering his head as the deafening barrage echoed off the high ceilings. "Crawl!" Victor shouted over the noise, firing short, controlled bursts down into the dark. Dante scrambled on his hands and knees down the hallway toward the east wing. The distance felt like miles. His knees scraped against the carpet, tearing his skin. He could hear the heavy boots of Donati's men pounding up the grand staircase. Victor was backing up, providing covering fire, but his left arm was slowing him down. The stitches were tearing under the strain of holding the heavy rifle. Dante could see the fresh dark stain spreading across the sleeve of his shirt. He reached the heavy oak door of the master suite. He pressed his hand flat against the scanner. Nothing happened. The power was out. "Victor, it won't open," he screamed. Victor slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle. "Under the scanner, there's a panel. Slide it up. It needs a physical key." He tossed a heavy brass key down the hall. It skittered across the carpet, stopping 3 feet from Dante. A tactical operative rounded the corner at the end of the hall. He raised a shotgun, aiming squarely at Victor's back. Time slowed down to a cruel, agonizing crawl. Victor was turning, but he wouldn't be fast enough. His left arm was failing. The man's finger was tightening on the trigger. Dante didn't think. He didn't weigh the moral consequences of taking a life. He just saw the man who had bought his sister's heartbeat about to lose his own. He raised the Smith Wesson, locked his elbows just like Victor had told him, and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed his wrists back, sending a shockwave up his arms. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed hallway. The operative lurched sideways, the shotgun blasting a hole into the ceiling as he collapsed against the wall, clutching a shattered collarbone. Victor didn't hesitate. He finished the man off with 2 rounds to the chest, grabbed the brass key from the floor, shoved it into the hidden panel, and wrenched the heavy door open. He grabbed Dante by the collar of his shirt and hauled him inside, slamming the steel-reinforced door shut and throwing the 3 heavy deadbolts just as a hail of bullets impacted the wood on the other side. The door held. Inside the pitch-black suite, the silence was immediate and deafening. Broken only by their ragged, desperate breathing. Dante dropped the gun. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. His hands were shaking so violently he couldn't feel his fingers. He backed away until his spine hit the wall, sliding down into a crouch. He pulled his knees to his chest, burying his face in his arms. He couldn't breathe. The smell of gunpowder was making him sick. And then he felt it. A familiar, terrible heat blooming in his gut. His skin flushing, his breath quickening for entirely the wrong reasons. No. Not now. Not here. His scent spiked, the warm bread and rain smell flooding the room, thick and desperate. Dante's body was betraying him. The adrenaline, the fear, the proximity to an alpha in crisis. His heat was coming on early. Too soon. Too fast. Victor dropped his rifle on the bed. He walked over to Dante in the dark. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell him it was okay, because it wasn't. And then he stopped. His nostrils flared. The scent hit him like a wave. Dante's Omega scent, usually subtle, was drowning the room now. Victor's body reacted before his mind could catch up. His alpha instincts roared to life, a primal surge of protectiveness and want that nearly dropped him to his knees. He gritted his teeth, fighting it. He'd spent 5 years suppressing this. 5 years of perfect control. But Dante's scent was everywhere. In his lungs. In his blood. Victor knelt in front of Dante, forcing himself to stay back, to keep distance. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. Dante lifted his head. Tears were streaming down his face, cutting tracks through the plaster dust. His eyes were glassy, pupils blown wide. His cheeks were flushed a deep, feverish red. "I can't," Dante's voice cracked. "Victor, I can't." "You're going into heat," Victor said. It wasn't a question. "I need to get you out of here. There are suppressants in the... Don't leave." Dante's hand shot out, grabbing Victor's wrist with surprising strength. "Please. Don't leave me alone. It's never been this bad." Victor's control was fraying. Every cell in his body was screaming at him to claim, to protect, to bury himself in the Omega scent and never come up for air. But Dante was terrified. And hurt. And the only reason Victor hadn't lost his mind entirely was because of the steady, grounding presence of the Omega who had saved his life. "I won't," Victor heard himself say. "I'm not leaving." He lowered himself to the floor, sitting beside Dante, his back against the wall. He didn't touch him. He didn't dare. Not yet. He just stayed close, letting his scent wash over the Omega, steady and strong. Dante's shaking eased, just slightly. He leaned into Victor's presence, his eyes fluttering closed. "You saved my life," Victor said quietly. "You shot him." "I actually shot him." Dante's voice was a broken whisper. "I actually shot him. You did what you had to do to survive. Do not apologize for surviving, Dante. Ever." Victor leaned in closer, his forehead resting lightly against Dante's. The heat of the Omega's skin was an anchor in the freezing dark. His scent was overwhelming now, sweet and desperate and calling to something primal and ancient in Victor's blood. "Carmine is 5 minutes out with 40 men," Victor murmured. "The steel will hold until then. It's over." They sat on the floor of the dark suite, Victor's body a barrier between Dante and the door. The heat was building in Dante's core, and Victor could feel every wave of it through the subtle changes in the Omega's scent. "You're burning up," Victor said. "I know." Dante's voice was strained. "I've never had a heat this strong. It's you. Your scent. It's triggering something." Victor's jaw tightened. "I'll move further away." "No." Dante grabbed his arm. "I need you closer. I know it's stupid. I know it's dangerous. But Victor, I need you." Victor's restraint shattered. He pulled Dante into his lap, wrapping his arms around the smaller Omega's body. Dante immediately curled into him, face pressed to Victor's throat, inhaling his scent like a dying man breathing oxygen. Victor's alpha instincts roared in approval, a deep, possessive satisfaction settling in his chest. "I won't claim you," Victor said, his voice rough. "Not like this. Not until you're sure. But I won't let you suffer alone." Dante sobbed in relief, his body relaxing into Victor's hold. The heat was still there, still burning, but it was bearable now. Manageable. With Victor's scent surrounding him, his body stopped screaming and started to settle. 5 years, Victor murmured into Dante's hair. I've been alone for 5 years. I thought I wanted it. But you. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Dante's scent flooded the room again, stronger now, wrapping around them both in a warm, intimate cocoon. Victor's fangs ached with the need to bite, to mark, to claim. But he held back. Barely. When this is over, Dante whispered, his voice muffled against Victor's throat, I'm not leaving. Whatever you're planning to say to push me away. I'm not leaving. Damn stubborn Omega, Victor said, but there was no heat in it. Just exhaustion. Just relief. They sat like that for what felt like hours, Victor's arms wrapped around Dante's trembling body, the smell of burning gunpowder and heat-soaked Omega thick in the air. When Carmine finally radioed that the estate was secure, Victor almost didn't want to move. But he had to. There was a body in the hallway. A house full of traitors to purge. A war to finish. He shifted, gently easing Dante off his lap. Stay here. Carmine's men will secure the perimeter. I need to. I know. Dante's voice was steadier now, the heat fever fading into a warm, manageable hum. Go. Do what you have to do. Victor looked at him for a long moment. The Omega's eyes were still glassy, his skin still flushed, but there was a strength in him that Victor hadn't fully appreciated before. 5 years, Victor said, echoing Dante's earlier unspoken thought. I think I was waiting for you. He didn't wait for Dante's response. He just stood, grabbed his rifle, and walked back out into the chaos, the memory of Dante's scent burning in his lungs. By 6 in the morning, the estate was secure. The snow had stopped, leaving the grounds blanketed in a pristine, blinding white that hid the violence of the night. Carmine and his crew had arrived like a sledgehammer, clearing Donati's men from the property with ruthless efficiency. Leo Donati himself had been found cowering in a black SUV at the edge of the property line. Victor hadn't bothered to go down and look at him. He simply gave Carmine a nod, and Leo Donati ceased to be a problem. Power was restored. The hum of the estate's heating system kicked back on. Dante was sitting on the edge of the massive bed in the master suite. He'd washed the plaster and dust off his face in the ensuite bathroom, but his eyes were still hollow. The adrenaline had crashed, leaving his bones feeling like lead. The heat was fading now, settling into a low, familiar ache that reminded him of how close he'd come to losing control entirely. Victor walked out of the walk-in closet. He'd changed his shirt and re-bandaged his arm himself. He looked exhausted, the lines around his mouth deeply carved. He walked over to his desk, the same desk where Dante had begged him for $60,000 3 weeks ago. He opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a heavy leather-bound ledger. He flipped to a page halfway through the book and stared at it for a long moment. Then he reached for a heavy silver lighter he kept next to his scotch glasses. He flicked it open. The flame hissed. He held the edge of the page to the fire. Dante watched, bewildered, as the thick paper curled and blackened, turning to ash that fluttered onto the polished wood. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Erasing the ledger," Victor said. He dropped the burning remnants of the page into an empty crystal ashtray, watching the final embers die out. He closed the book and looked at Dante. "Your debt is paid. The 60,000 is cleared." Dante stood up. His legs were shaky, but he forced himself to stand tall. "We agreed to 5 years. It hasn't been a month. You took a bullet for me, Bennett. Figuratively and literally. The contract is void." Victor gripped the edge of the desk. He refused to look at Dante now, staring at the wall above his head. I've already transferred $2 million into a trust under Isabella's name. It will cover her medical bills, her college, her life. Carmine is waiting downstairs. He's going to drive you to the hospital. You can pack your things. Dante didn't move. The silence in the room grew heavy, suffocating. He was sending him away. The cage door was open. Dante had everything he'd ever wanted, his sister's safety, his freedom. Why? He asked quietly. Victor finally looked at him. The icy, controlled facade cracked, revealing the raw, bleeding man underneath. Because look at you. You have blood on your hands. You have gunpowder in your hair. You almost went into heat because of me, because my scent triggered you. I drag everything I touch down into the dirt, Dante. I don't want to see you become a ghost in this house. Take the money and get out before I change my mind. It was an order. The absolute command of a mafia boss. Dante walked across the room. He didn't stop until he was standing inches from Victor, looking up into his slate-gray eyes. He saw the fear Victor was trying so desperately to hide. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of ruining Dante. Don't you ever decide what I can handle, Dante said, his voice dropping to a fierce, steady whisper. Victor's jaw tightened. Dante. I was ruined before I met you, Dante interrupted. I was watching my sister die. Counting pennies to see if we could afford heat. That was hell. This, he gestured to the bullet-scarred door of the suite, this is just noise. He reached out, placing his hand flat against Victor's chest, right over his heart. It was beating fast, a hard, erratic rhythm beneath the expensive cotton of his shirt. I slept in your bed, Dante said softly, the memory of that first terrifying night hanging between them. And you didn't throw me out. You gave me a glass of water. You let me stay when you had every reason to destroy me. So I'm not leaving. Unless you tell me you don't want me here. If you tell me that, I'll walk out that door right now. Victor looked down at him. He saw the fierce, unyielding light in Dante's brown eyes. He wasn't a maid anymore. He wasn't a hostage to a hospital bill. He was an equal. A partner who had walked through the fire and chosen to stay in the ashes. Victor brought his right hand up, threading his fingers into Dante's messy, dust-covered hair. He gripped the back of his neck, pulling him in until there was no space left between them. When he kissed Dante, it wasn't gentle. It was desperate, rough, and deeply human. It tasted like ash, salt, and the promise of a future they both had to fight for. Dante kissed him back, wrapping his arms around Victor's waist, anchoring himself to the monster who had become his salvation. Victor pulled back just far enough to look into Dante's eyes. The claim, it won't be like this. It won't be in a hallway, in the middle of a war. When I mark you, Dante, it will be real. Permanent. You understand that? Dante nodded, his throat tight. I understand. I've never wanted an Omega before you, Victor said, the admission rough and raw. I've never wanted anyone. But you. I know, Dante whispered. I know. The walls of the fortress were finally down. The cage had become a home. Hours later, the sun broke through the gray winter clouds, casting long shafts of light across the ruined estate. Inside the master suite, the heavy curtains were drawn, plunging the room into a quiet, comforting twilight. The estate was silent. The war was over. At least for today. On the massive California king bed, Victor Russo was fast asleep. He lay on his back, the heavy charcoal duvet pulled up to his waist. Beside him, curled tightly against his side, Dante rested his head on Victor's uninjured shoulder. One of Victor's large hands was resting protectively on his hip, anchoring him even in sleep. There was no empty space between them anymore. Dante lay awake for a while, listening to the steady rhythm of Victor's heartbeat beneath his ear. The alpha scent, ozone and rain, wrapped around him like a second skin, warm and safe and steady. The heat wasn't gone. It would come again, stronger next time. And when it did, there would be a mark, a claim, permanent and irrevocable. But Dante wasn't afraid. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Victor stirred, his arm tightening around Dante's waist. "You're thinking too loud," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. Dante smiled against his chest. "Sorry." "Don't be." Victor pressed a kiss to the top of his head. "Just stay. I'm not going anywhere." The fortress was finally a home. The end.